How do you picture the U.S. Navy? You probably think of weapon-packed ships, vehicles that can move almost anywhere, or maybe real floating fortresses with tons of guns and excellent camouflage. What about a wooden ship or a forest? Yep, that's also a thing. And now you'll find out why the U.S. Navy needs all that. The forest. The U.S. Navy has a base called Naval Support Activity Crane. It might seem like military bases related to the Navy should be near the coast. However, NSA Crane is hundreds of miles from any ocean or sea. It's located in southwestern Indiana, about 25 miles from Bloomington. Moreover, this base, far from big water, is actually the third largest in the world, covering an area of 100 square miles. There are about 6,000 people working there, dealing with a lot of important tech problems like developing night vision systems, electronic warfare systems, underwater combat systems, and small arms for the Marine Corps. And on top of that, they take care of the forest. Millions of trees located over an area of 77 square miles are carefully maintained, and there's constant monitoring of them. Plus, all the plants can grow without any negative impact, unlike those not protected by the military. The environmental managers at the base say there's an ethic of conservation here. This land was made for the forest. Because of this, the land is managed to maintain the health of the environment, and the trees that are cut down are carefully chosen to maintain the forests in good condition. And in general, cutting only happens when it'll have the least effect on the local ecosystem. For instance, they don't touch trees when a certain species of bats is nesting. However, for the U.S. Navy, not all of the forest is that important. Obviously, it's great when NSA Crane workers can step out after a long day and take a walk, enjoying the beautiful views. Plus, maintaining the health of the forest means a lot of extra jobs. It's also clear that protecting ecosystems overall is good for the state. But the main focus is on the area covering just 0.06 square miles. It was designated on May 8, 1976 and named the Constitution Grove. A big name for a small section of forest, which, let's say, is unusual. But there are reasons for it. There's a high concentration of high-quality white oak here. Let's say it right away. This tree is a true legend of North America. They say that if the oak is the king of trees, then the white oak is the king of kings. Its royal wood has been used since its discovery for making flooring, furniture, bridges, and railroad cars. It was also used and is still used for making whiskey barrels, coffins, and much more. Moreover, the white oak even provided shelter for the first Americans, and some say it literally kick-started the Industrial Revolution and became the building material that built the country. The main reason why white oak has always been in such high demand is its qualities. It's very hard and strong. Plus, the wood has a fine, uniform texture and straight grains, which makes it easy to work with for craftsmen and builders. But as we mentioned, white oak is used for barrels and flooring, things that need resistance to water and decay. In fact, this legendary tree has those properties too. Now let's become tree experts for a minute. This is what a cross-section of red oak looks like, and this is what a white oak looks like. Our hero's pores are filled with special cells, tyloses, but the white oak doesn't have them. That's why white oak doesn't let moisture in or rot, unlike its red cousin and many other tree species. In the U.S., they thank nature for the material they can use for flooring, barrels, and shipbuilding. You didn't think the U.S. Navy bought up huge plots of land, grew a forest, and then set aside a special grove of white oak just so someone could make quality floors and whiskey storage, did you? Wait a minute. Why do they need wood for ships in the 21st century? We've seen all those high-tech metal machines that the U.S. currently has. What's wood got to do with it? Now remember what the grove was called. Well, trees are grown there specifically for one special ship, the USS Constitution. USS Constitution. Yeah, this ship is far from ordinary. Just like the oak that's being grown for it, the ship is a legend too. First off, it's the oldest warship in the world still afloat. It was commissioned in 1797, and even George Washington saw it. So as of today, the ship's already 227 years old, and yes, it's still listed as an active unit in the U.S. Navy. At the height of its active service, the ship was the terror of the seas, boasting huge dimensions. The length of the ship was 175 feet between perpendiculars, the width was 43 feet, and the height was 220 feet. The number of guns was impressive. It could hold 44 cannons. But according to some reports, the legendary ship often carried more than 50 cannons at once. The ship has a second name, Old Ironsides. Just a reminder, the ship's made of wood, so there's not much to do with iron. But here's the thing. In 1812, the USS Constitution defeated 5 British ships, and during one of those battles, with the Guerriere, the American crew watched as enemy cannonballs bounced off the hull without doing any damage, the wooden hull. In 1906, the U.S. Navy decided that the legend should live on, so it needed to be properly maintained, which required almost complete restoration every 10 years. However, it was discovered that the suitable southern oak originally used to build the ship was hard to find, so they decided to use a similar white oak instead, which had comparable properties, but there were still issues, as it was also hard to find the right kind of oak to replace the necessary parts. Then they found a place with a high concentration of the right trees, which they named the Constitution Grove. Of course, there's no need for cannonballs to bounce off the ship anymore, but for restoring the USS Constitution, it's still necessary to use only the finest materials. For example, between 2015 and 2017, the experts working on the ship selected 150 mature oak trees, of which 70 were examined. As a result, only 35 were suitable for the USS Constitution, and with them, they replaced the decayed planks of the hull ranging from 30 to 40 feet long. Also, the restored ship should consist of roughly 10 to 15% wood that includes original materials set during its original construction period from 1795 to 1797. On top of that, its look and build need to be as close as possible to the vessel that once sailed the seas in the 19th century. In short, keeping the ship in good shape isn't easy. And that's not even getting into how big oak trees grow, which makes them tough to work with, but people manage to do it all the time. After all, the USS Constitution is an active-duty U.S. Navy ship, and of course, there's just no way they could ignore such a literal symbol of the U.S. Navy, one that's been through all kinds of trials. Besides that famous battle that earned the ship the nickname Old Ironsides, the USS Constitution had another intense encounter in the early 19th century with a far-from-weak 38-gun ship, the HMS Java. The meeting didn't go too well for the British, as their ship ended up heavily damaged. They didn't even bother capturing it, which was pretty standard back then. They just set it on fire, since after tangling with the USS Constitution, it was little more than a drifting wreck. Back in the same early 1800s, the USS Constitution managed to slip away from 2 enemy ships, the Cyane and the Levant, despite being damaged, all thanks to dumping overboard its drinking water, food, and even alcohol. And once again, that thick oak hull did its job. Then more than 50 cannons came in handy as the ship went on to knock both enemy vessels out of action. And then began the battle against an unbeatable foe, time itself. The ship was moved to the reserves and almost scrapped, and by the early 20th century, it was even set to be used as target practice for artillery. But for the legend, there are no invincible opponents. Eventually, the ship was restored and in 1907 opened up for visitors as a museum. In 1931, it was decided to turn the docked museum into a floating one. Yes, they'd need a tugboat, but that didn't stop this legendary ship from attracting 4.5 million visitors across 90 cities. In 1975, the USS Constitution officially became the unique ship and was reclassified as a Zero-class vessel. The ship today. As we mentioned, the ship is still in active service and listed as part of the U.S. Navy. But clearly, no one in their right mind would send it into modern conflicts. It's more about symbolism and remembering the past. Of course, no one's even thinking about getting rid of a ship that's been through so many different events. What's more, no one's even considered forgetting the USS Constitution or keeping it anchored in one spot. For instance, they sent it sailing in 1997 to mark its 200th anniversary. No tugboat this time, unlike in 1931. Right now, the USS Constitution is on its annual cruise, during which it sails a short distance from its main location and then returns. You can get on board through a lottery. Yes, a tugboat is still used, but it probably won't stop history lovers from enjoying the little adventure. After all, who doesn't need help when they're over 200 years old? Naturally, there are a lot of people who want to try it. Just experiencing a voyage on a ship with this kind of history is priceless. But the USS Constitution also fires its guns during the cruises. Sure, there are fewer cannons these days, but you can still have an unforgettable experience, close to what it must have been like to sail on warships from the past. During off-duty hours, the USS Constitution is docked at the first pier of the former Charlestown Navy Yard and is open to visitors year-round. The ship even has a crew of 75 people, all of whom are active-duty U.S. Navy personnel. They handle maintenance, operate the ship, give tours to the public, and also take part in various ceremonies, educational programs, and special events. All of this is considered a special duty for any member of the U.S. Navy. USS Constellation. The USS Constitution is a ship that survived many challenges and now brings joy to people after another restoration, but it wasn't the only ship presented to George Washington and built in the late 18th century. The USS Constellation was built alongside it. It was a bit smaller than its cousin. The length was 164 feet, the width was 39 feet, and it had up to 48 guns. However, the ship was built as an innovation for the U.S. Navy at the time, capable of withstanding European ships that had superior characteristics. Its length and width made it possible to mount very heavy weapons without losing wind speed. The USS Constellation was designed as a ship that could outrun an enemy battleship. All of this was complemented by a heavy hull and an innovative design at the time to reduce buckling, which gave the ship greater strength than lighter frigates. The ship's maiden battle was the fight with the L'Insurgent in 1799, during which the 36-gun French vessel suffered a crushing defeat, unable to put up any kind of fight against the innovative creation of the Americans. By the way, this was the first big victory of a warship designed and built by the United States. After that, the USS Constellation captured the schooner Union and took back the British merchant ship Brothers, which the French had seized earlier. Together with the USS Insurgent, it also captured the schooner Diligente. Then there was the battle against La Vengeance. After 5 hours of fighting in 1800, the American ship won. The enemy vessel eventually ran aground, but the USS Constellation itself took some serious damage and needed repairs. However, the ship's captain, Thomas Truxton, clearly wasn't upset. After the battle, the enemy was so humiliated that they claimed they were up against a much bigger and more powerful ship. After that, the USS Constellation became the flagship several times, but in 1853 it was dismantled. Yes, the ship shown in our videos is actually not the USS Constellation, but a replica that was built almost from scratch in 1854. In the end, despite its rich history, the ship didn't stand the test of time. HMS Victory. When the Constitution and the Constellation were launched, the British ship HMS Victory had already been sailing the seas for over 10 years, and right now it still exists. Yes, you're looking at the oldest active warship in the world still in service. The previous ship seemed pretty big to you? Well, here's a real behemoth. Its length is 187 feet and its width is 52 feet. There are already 104 guns here. But don't be too surprised by its size and power. This isn't a frigate like the Constitution or the Constellation, but a ship of the line, which by definition was the largest and most capable warship of its time. The best types of wood the British could find at the time were used in building the hull, both English and Baltic oak, which was specially brought to England from Poland and East Prussia. The underwater part of the ship was covered with 3,923 copper plates. Victory has a rich history of battles. In 1778, the ship fought the French fleet off the coast of Ushant Island. In 1782, it took part in a fight against Spanish and French forces. In 1797, it played a key role in the defeat of the Spanish flotilla. Overall, those times were a constant bloodbath between Britain, France, and Spain, with countless battles fought, each with different outcomes. In particular, Victory, under Admiral Nelson's command in 1805, took part in the biggest naval battle in the history of the British Navy, the Battle of Trafalgar. Britain defeated the combined fleets of Spain and France, and Victory played a key role sinking the ship Bucentaure. After that, the ship no longer participated in battles. However, no one touched it because of its connection to Horatio Nelson, a key figure in British history. There were several restorations, and eventually the ship ended up in the dry dock at the historic dockyard in Portsmouth. Now it's a museum reminding people from all over the world about the feats of the sailors and Admiral Nelson, as well as what British shipbuilding was like in the 18th century. By the way, the USS Constitution left its mark on the history of the HMS Victory too. In 2007, the commander of the British ship visited the legendary American vessel. Whether it's a coincidence or not, this led to a major restoration, which probably saved the key participant of the Battle of Trafalgar from fading into oblivion. Now both ships are record breakers, each in its own category.